Hey everybody, welcome back to Brainpower. Today is January 30th, 2025, and this is episode 4. Today is a special day because it is our first video episode and also our first episode with a guest. The one and only David Johnston is joining us in today's episode. Let's dive into it. And welcome everybody to the very first video episode of Brainpower. And I have a special guest, David Johnston. You might already know, if you're in the Morpheus ecosystem and do not know his name, I don't know how that's even possible. But for people who maybe are not yet as ingrained in the ecosystem as others, David, can you give an introduction as to who you are? Because I thought about doing it, but I know I would miss stuff, and I might even interject to add some stuff in. If you're too humble, I'll add stuff.
No worries. Good to be here, man. I'm happy to do a quick intro. So real quick, I got into crypto in 2012, originally through Bitcoin. Spent a lot of the first few years thinking like what I could build on blockchains. And that sort of naturally attracted me to digital assets. So I helped with like the first digital asset protocols. First there was Mastercoin, and then Vitalik started making proposals about doing scripting on chain. That eventually became the Ethereum white paper. Read a report about the Ethereum token launch and sort of like the idea of putting smart contracts on blockchain. I was very excited about. Probably most people know me for coining the term decentralized applications, or dApps. So I wrote the framework for that back in October of 2013. I was like, hey guys, let's use these things that are great about Bitcoin, peer-to-peer, open source, blockchain backend, and has its own token as like the 4 fundamentals that describe what a dApp is, right? And if you fit those 4, then you're a real dApp, right? And if you don't, you're something in Web 2, right? And that concept really kind of caught on. It ended up getting included in the white paper for Ethereum, where they described themselves initially as a platform for smart contracts and dApps. And so, yeah, that kind of set the tone for the next 10, 13 years. Was like people sending me proposals and ideas, and I tried to help with each project along the way that would sort of extend the tech stack from decentralized money to smart contracts to decentralized data storage, you name it, right? So ended up helping out with the first second layers on both Bitcoin and Ethereum. That was a project back in 2014 called Factum, way ahead of its time, even before they were called second layers. And yeah, so it's been an amazing journey. And I was actually into AI even before crypto. Back in 2012, kind of realized I was too early to that wave, to say the least. And so decided to focus on crypto instead, but kind of picked my head up in 2022 after I'd done some public company stuff, trying to do like the first Web3 public companies in Europe. The regulators are not a fan. So like they did not like that.
That means you're doing something right though.
Yeah. Except for when, like they have all the resources and delist you, then it's like, crap. Okay. I'm just going to go back to building fully decentralized tech. Right. And that's right about the time ChatGPT was taking off. And it's like, all right, I know a bit about AI. I'm going to get back to the cutting edge of that. And I'm really interested, like, where's the intersection with crypto? And then I realized, oh, this is going to be the interface for all the smart contracts, all the dApps, all the stuff in blockchain. So it's going to be abstracted. You're going to talk to an AI, and it's going to be able to do what you want on chain. And when that light bulb went off, I don't know, it was late 22 or early 23. It's like, okay, I gotta focus on this, and ended up writing a paper on defining smart agents as exactly that, an AI connected to your wallet that can take on-chain actions and execute smart contracts and all the rest. So that kind of started this whole journey the last few years. And then I read a copy of the Morpheus paper and like, yep, this is what we need. We got to build a network out of this, because the truth is most people are not going to run this on their own hardware, right? We know this story from Bitcoin and Ethereum. People may be shocked to know there's only like 10,000 Bitcoin nodes in the entire world, right? And it's like hobbyists like me and companies and developers that actually need to run a node. And Ethereum, it's pretty similar. There's like 20,000 full nodes. There might be 1 million validators, but like that's not really used for end users. And right. So it's like, that's a niche. If we want decentralized AI to go mainstream, you got to get to the application layer. You got to have a network. You got to have somebody else running the GPU. And that insight in the paper is like, yeah, this is the right direction. And ended up talking to Eric Voorhees at Permissionless on September 9th of 23. I was like, hey, have you seen this paper? We kind of nerded out on it. And he's like, yeah, this within shortly after that, he was tweeting like, guys, decentralized intelligence might be as important as decentralized money. And if you know Eric and his contributions to Bitcoin and this ecosystem the last 15 years, that's a really strong statement. Right?
That tweet is what got me into this.
Yeah.
I knew of Eric. I knew his background. I followed him. He's one of those people that if he says something, I pay attention to it, typically. Yep. And that exact tweet is something to the effect of decentralized AI is akin to decentralized money. And I was like, what is this? Yep. All right. I don't want to cut you off, but I have two things I just want to add to your background. And correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
You worked on Mastercoin, correct?
J.R. Willett was the engineer and the brilliance behind it. People give me a little too much credit. I basically just saw the proposal and I was like, hey, JR, this is great, but I see you want everybody to send the Bitcoin to one wallet. How about there be a foundation and a multi-sig right. And like, you know, we put some framework around it. And he's like, cool. And so I ended up serving on the board of Mastercoin. And that's actually where I got to meet Craig Sellers for the first time. So he interviewed to be the CTO of Mastercoin and built out the initial implementation, right? And after that, he went on to build Tether. And people forget, like the initial USDT was all on Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, that's why I brought it up, because I didn't know your exact involvement, but I guess the best way of putting it is you were there for Mastercoin and involved in it. And for people who might not know the history, it's essentially the first thing built on top of Bitcoin. But they took Bitcoin and said, hey, we can do more with this. Let's try to build Mastercoin. So I implore people to check that out. But This is who we're talking to here today. We're talking to somebody who was there for that. You know, where a lot of us entered the space a lot later. For myself, it was 2016, which is still on the total timeline relatively early, but but there's like leaps and bounds that happened before that, you know? And then the other thing I wanted to clarify too is Johnston's law, which you did not mention, which to my understanding is something to the effect of if it can be tokenized and decentralized, it will be.
So I was on stage at Coin Summit, and I think it was May of 2014 or something like that. And I was up there with Vitalik, and people didn't even have a word for these projects yet. They called them Bitcoin 2.0, right? And so I was talking about Mastercoin. He was talking about Ethereum. There's another guy talking about a project called Next. And I kind of summed it up as like, look, my fundamental thesis is everything that can be decentralized will be decentralized.
Well, somebody tweeted
that out. Somebody tweeted that out, and it proved kind of sticky. And I jokingly called that Johnston's law, right? And so, yeah, you know, I threw up a website and people have quoted it back to me for a while. And now I see it like on people's Twitter profiles. And it's like, cool, you know, that because I wanted to give people the idea that this is inevitable, right? If it can be decentralized, it will be decentralized. And I really mean that. And so even though it's taken a long period of time, look how far we've come from decentralized money to smart contracts to now smart agents. Like we're getting further and further up the tech stack. It's not the protocol layer anymore. Like I use Venice on my phone every day. And you don't have to be a techie to understand that, you know, you're benefiting from it and you didn't have to deal with a smart contract or know how the technology works underneath. Like that's winning. That's how we get to mass adoption.
So you touched on this before too. This was kind of the one of the aha moments for me with Morpheus and just the whole decentralized AI and smart agent movement was a problem that crypto's had for a long time is the user experience is not amazing. For somebody who's not, even today, for somebody who's not extremely into the space, it is not particularly easy to take self-custody, interact with DApp, you know, not sign the wrong message, make sure you have all the correct security measures, all of those things. But the thing about agents is you don't have to, because your agent is going to do it for you. And I think for people who want to manually interact with dApps and manually interact with crypto protocols and all these things, they'll still have the ability to do that. And that's great. But the reality is most people will not do that.
Yep.
They're going to be using front-end applications, or their agent is going to be directly calling to a smart contract and completing whatever the thing is for them. They're not going to need to know how it works. And,
Yeah.
and the thing that I always kind of draw the parallel to is credit cards. Every single person you know uses a credit card. How many of those people can walk you through what happens on the back end when they swipe the card?
Yeah.
I know now only because I took the time to look it up, because when I had that realization, I was like, I didn't know, like what actually happens? Like, where's the debt being held? Where's the money transfer happening? It's the same thing with all of this. You're not going to need to necessarily know how it works. But if you want to know how it works,
Sure.
that's awesome. And like, you'll have tons of opportunity because of that, which is ultimately what's being built here. But no, I think that's a good background. And as far as like, what is Morpheus protocol? I've done a couple episodes on that. So people, like, please go back and listen to those. Hopefully they're helpful. David's written some amazing articles, and I believe is continuing to write them. So we're covering those too. But let's talk about some current events. We can start wherever you want. There's been a lot of big stuff going on.
Sure. Well, like the big talk this week has been DeepSeek. And it feels like most people don't understand what it is or in which ways it's significant. Right. So if you haven't heard of DeepSeek, it's a new open source model released by a Chinese company. And what was sort of like really disruptive is the rumor was it only took $5 million to train this new model. Now, I'm a bit skeptical about that number. I've seen other estimates that are more like 200 million. But the first thing to understand is this is hugely positive for decentralized AI. Like, the better the models get, the more powerful all of these decentralized AI platforms become. So whether it's Morpheus or Venice or Akash or Bitters, like, they're all going to benefit from open source winning. And like, NVIDIA's stock price took a hit. And it's like, I don't think you understand, if the training becomes cheaper, people are going to do a lot more inference, use of existing models. Like, that's the long term, is not I trained the world's greatest frontier model. It's like, no, 99% of people aren't going to be training their own models.
Yeah.
They're just going to be using existing ones. And there's entire economics laws that are dedicated to, like, if the price goes down, the usage actually increases greater than the price decline. Right. So ironically, there'll probably be more demand for GPUs than less demand. Right. So we'll see what happens with NVIDIA stock. I don't know any. I don't know.
I think it's rebounded a little bit, actually. I was going to look really quick.
Sure.
Just at the time of talking about this. Hang on one sec.
Sure. But maybe the other thing while you look it up to understand is they probably also didn't necessarily do all the training for this model. There's been a well understood, and you can look up the paper from Stanford 2 or 3 years ago, the whole, like, there is no moat. Part of that comes out of, you can ping a model, and if you record the responses often enough and ping it with enough different questions, you basically can kind of simulate.
Copy it.
Yeah, you can simulate or mirror what the weights are. So no proprietary model is really going to be like completely, immune to this. In fact, it's fairly easy, unless you're going to limit people's use of the model, then what's the point of having the model, right? So the open source is going to quickly catch up, and okay, it might be 5% worse, but like, you're going to get most of the value of any new frontier model using that sort of mirroring technique. And the other big thing is chain of thought, which is what this is implementing. If you played with it, right, you can see it thinking.
Yeah, it tells you like how it's logically thinking through whatever it's giving you. Yeah.
It's funny talking to developers like Rakshak. He's like, we've known about that for 3 or 4 years. Like, these guys are just the first ones to like actually put it into action. First it was OpenAI, and now this open source group is sort of emulating what they had already done. But I am very confident Grok 3, Llama 4, all these groups are going to implement. There's nothing magic about what they've implemented there. They're just willing to spend more on tokens to get a higher quality output, right? And as the price of tokens keeps falling, right? I'm talking about AI tokens here. That's a logical things to do. Like, okay, the tokens are 1,000 times less expensive. Sure, I'll spend 50 times more tokens to get a better result, right? So that's just sort of something we're getting to. So I don't think it is what most people think it is. And if you're running the model locally, which this open source, or at least open weights, like on Venice, you're not sending any information back to China. Like, so all this
not
fear mongering
necessarily.
about like,
Yeah,
oh, you're going to give all your data away is like, not if you're actually using the open source. Like maybe if you were using their
literal
centralized
DeepSeek.
website.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and so I did look. The stock is still down 16%, so it hasn't really recovered. But I think, and by the way, officially today, OpenAI, it looks like, has claimed that DeepSeek did copy their model. Which, think about it. Okay, to your point, if somebody builds a really great proprietary model and I make a decentralized agent and I give it instructions to learn how that model works, how long is it going to stay proprietary? And even if you get within a margin of, 10%, does it matter in practice? I mean, maybe,
Right.
and it's hard to know. But yeah, it really is so bullish for decentralized AI because it just shows exactly that like over time, it's inevitable.
Well, and if you understand these technical aspects, it explains a lot of what they were trying to do with censoring open source in the US.
Right.
Because they understood there isn't a technical moat, right? That's why they lobbied the Biden administration to pass that executive order in October of 23 and say, hey, we're going to limit the models and they can only be so big and open source bad and all these ridiculous things. That's what was driving it, is they understand there isn't a technical moat. And those rules have all been swept away now by the new regime. And so we've sort of narrowly avoided this dystopian outcome where it was going to be like a couple of big companies or a couple of big governments really dominating all of the AI tech. And now we've got an open field. Right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be wild, but it's going to be a lot of fun.
What I hope they realize, though, is even at a political stage, like I've said often, my core value typically is like personal liberty, generally speaking. But any nation state that wants to be truly in control, that understands how the technology works, would be against open source. But the problem is you run into this game theory issue where if you are not for open source and then somebody else steps in and says, well, I am, then you lose. Didn't we see this? I believe I was very young at the time, but I think we saw this with the UK when websites really first started to pop up. They started cracking down on private domains and websites, and Silicon Valley said, hey, we'll allow it, and look where everything's made now.
Yep.
It's basically what happens. And especially with all of the tech, you could have a computer and build this system like a laptop. Like you could be anywhere in the world, and so whoever's willing to adopt it will. And it's just a game theory problem. So I'm glad that it seems as though our nation state has woken up to that, hopefully, and been like, okay, well, it's going to be inevitable, so let's be the best at it.
Yep, 100%.
Which is what I was hoping for.
Yeah. The term often thrown around is prisoner's dilemma.
Prisoner's dilemma, exactly.
Yeah, so if like one country opts out and there are 200 competing countries, there's always going to be somebody friendly in Singapore or Dubai or Switzerland or anybody that goes ahead and embraces the high freedom, high liberty option, gets this giant multi-billion-dollar boon, right? And for the internet, that was the US, right? There are countries in Europe that wanted you to have a license equivalent to owning a telco to run a website.
Amazing.
No websites were built in those countries.
Right. Why would they be?
And so it's like it all went to the US. So you can try to restrict it, but you're just hobbling your own economy. So yeah, so the genie's out of the bottle, right?
Yeah.
And that's probably the next thing to talk about is this huge news from Venice.
Yeah.
That they have tokenized, which is something I was really, really hoping for, because it puts them firmly on the path of decentralization. Right. They were already using open source models. It was already privacy by default. Right. And tokenizing it and letting people have the token to access the service is huge because it opens it up, not just to credit cards or other forms of payment, but to anybody, permissionlessly across the globe. And so they've done such an amazing job, and credit to Eric and Tina for building such a beautiful front end that requires no technical knowledge. Like you don't even have to log in. You just show up on their website and it works.
You can save the website as an app on your phone. What's it called? Why can't I think of the word?
Progressive web app.
Yeah, exactly. And just have it. And I've done this for multiple people. I've taken multiple people's phones and been like, hey, you want to get on to decentralized AI? Check this out. Save it onto their home screen, and now they have access to Venice. It's amazing. What I love about this too, they built the product before they did the airdrop. They had like 300,000 active users, I'm pretty sure, before they even, to my knowledge, literally to my knowledge, because I found out about it when everybody did, that like they had all of that already happening before they said, let's tokenize it, as opposed to we're going to launch token, raise a bunch of VC money and try to build this thing.
Yep.
Which I love. I love that they did it that way.
Yeah. To my knowledge, 0 VC dollars. Right.
Interesting. Yeah.
And this was them bootstrapping a real product and then sort of airdropping in the community after they'd found product market fit. It reminds me a lot of like Uniswap, right? Yeah. Uniswap didn't have a token until they had millions of users, and they're like, okay, like we're going to put a token out there. But like, it wasn't, it's definitely a good way of doing it. And it's really refreshing that they focused on the communities aligned with them. So like the airdrop to the Morpheus community, people that had a pro account on Venice, of which, like you said, 400,000 people had already been using it, like 50,000 daily actives. I don't know, some number of that are the pro account holders. Sure. So all those people got a really amazing reward, right? And that's kind of how you have to do it, because if you know the reward's coming, it makes it a little easier to game.
Oh, totally. So, well, you know what I was already doing, not knowing it, is I was not anytime, but a lot of the time I was using like any AI app, I was also running the prompt through Venice to see what the differences were, because I wanted to see if there were differences, and that ended up, paying dividends. But like, had I known that was coming, you would have just sat there all day and you could have written a bot and just been like, hey, interact with this every 2 seconds for the next month, and that, yeah, it's the way that it was done was very well done, in like the airdrop sphere.
And I expect a lot of people are going to emulate the success of that model, which is, now that builder awards.
I was going to say, can we tie this into builders and how they are currently the largest builder in terms of more staked? And so, yeah, can you dive into that part of things? Because that's exactly where I was going to go next to.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, that's sort of the next logical conclusion is the builder awards have launched on Morpheus. So if you go to mor.org and you click the link at the top for the builder dashboard, there's a ton of great projects that are setting up subnets. And yeah, Venice is by far the most popular, and you can see how much MOR tokens how many MOR tokens are staked to them.
I want to give a quick shout out to CoinCap on the Arbitrum side, just because they are the #1 on the Arbitrum side. You have to toggle from base to ARB to see both. So I do want to give them that shout out. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Noun Space and Warlord, and like there are tons of great projects already on there, and that's just getting going. But it wouldn't surprise me if other people are like, hey, stake to our builder and get an airdrop, right? Yeah. Stake to our builder, get a pro account. Stake to our builder subnet and get, XYZ reward. And that's like the whole idea. And it's cool to see that sort of massively validated by Venice and these other groups being like, yeah, like we recognize people involved in Morpheus are like the builders and compute providers and the capital providers for this whole decentralized AI ecosystem, right? And because there's no pre-mine in Morpheus, there's no like owned by one chain or owned by one foundation, it's open infrastructure for everybody, right? It's already on Ethereum and Base and Arbitrum, and looking at the code in GitHub, it looks like it'll go out next in Solana fairly soon. So like this is Morpheus ecosystem just going to keep spreading across these different chains and all this different infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to hit on 2 points on this just to reiterate them. On the builder side, there's a lot of people in the social channels asking, hey, I want to go stake my more. What do I get in return for this? I think one of the amazing things about this is it depends. What's the builder going to give you? How is the builder going to incentivize you to provide them with more tokens, which is effectively providing them with inference? Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I as a user stake my more to a builder, that builder has the ability to then stake that more to the protocol, which is giving them their pro rata share of inference, correct?
Yeah.
And in addition to that, that builder is also earning emissions in more from the protocol. So they're both getting the inference basically covered through the community and then also actually being rewarded for it, which what do they give you as a reward for that? Are they going to do their own token? Are they going to give you a product or service, something like Venice, access to community, access to media, whatever it is? It can be anything. I mean, whatever, create value and more will come your way. I mean, that's what's so cool about it.
Well, and that's what I love when I read the white paper. I was like, oh, this is a marketplace.
Yeah.
Right? And I believe in marketplaces, right? Let anybody offer something and the individual can act and say, yeah, I want that. right? That is so much more efficient than votes. Like votes, you get the lowest common denominator. Like, okay, if 51% of the people think like me, then I'll be able to access it. Why? Like just make it an open marketplace, let anybody stake towards it, and the rewards can flow in proportion to their staking. So if a builder subnet gets 1% of all the staked more, okay, great. Then they get 1% of the emissions, right? Directly from the protocol. And think about the benefits. There's no application. There's no committee. There's no bureaucracy. There's no like time delay. We're going to take a vote at the end of the month. Like, no, you're just able to do it. Right. And so I think we're just going to see this explosion of projects adopting that model on top of Morpheus. And so since Venice has gone out, like we've had a huge set of incoming people like, oh, how do I do this? So like, go for it. Here's the form. Here's the link. Set up your building.
What I love about this is it's built-in VC almost if you're a great builder with a great idea, because there could be some 16-year-old sitting in Sevilla, Spain right now who taught him or herself how to code and has this awesome idea and creates a builder on Morpheus and people discover it and it's a great idea, but all they need is the compute resources to make it go live. And now it's live because the community said, oh, this is great. Let's fund it.
Yep. 100%. And to your point, most of what people need that are building an agent or a front end like Venice is the inference. That's the most expensive part. Like if you're a coder, you can probably put in the sweat equity of actually building it, but then somebody's got to run all the computers and provide all the inference. And OpenAI is expensive.
Yeah. Like, well, the line I like that I've heard you use, and I'm not going to call out any specific projects, but just like the way that some of these exist today, when the credit card runs out, the inference runs out. This solves that completely.
Yeah, anybody launching an agent, based on like ChatGPT, like it's not persistent. It's probably not going to be around in a while. It's not composable. You can't build on top of it. So as soon as the developer pulls their credit card, like it's going to stop responding.
Yeah.
But and that's an important thing to understand. That's why blockchains are so powerful, is because they have persistence. And the way they have persistence is the software can pay for its own hardware.
Right.
That was the breakthrough of Satoshi. Like he didn't invent like new cryptography or a lot of things. He put them together in a novel way. And he said, these emissions are going to go fairly out to these people that do these critical functions for the network to work. Right. And that proof of work, now you have proof of stake, right? Those fundamentals make something last, right? This is why, if you remember the days of Hyperledger, like all the corporates who are like, we're going to have private blockchains.
Yeah.
They're not going to have any tokens. And it's like, so they're going to have no persistence.
Yeah. So you have a business.
Well, nobody's going to build on them.
Yeah.
Got it. Ethereum just won. Got it. Good to know. Right?
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, no, you're exactly right. And that's to me, like the most exciting part. And I think that because all four silos of Morpheus are live now, people can see in real time. Because for a while, anytime I talked to somebody about it, it was like, hey, this conceptual thing of like, this is what it will look like. And now it's like, no, it's here. Like we have this right now. It's just in the early stages of it. Absolutely. So on that topic, David, are there any specific like types of builders or types of agents or ideas that you would love to see kind of come to fruition, or like anything that you're willing to put out there?
So you can kind of think about this in different categories, right? There are people building agents, which is like the hot thing right now. But people are sort of getting beyond, oh, there's a chatbot and it talks to me on X. That was a cool proof of concept, but now people are releasing agents that do DeFi, do trading, can do actions on my behalf. If you saw the announcement of Operator by OpenAI, it's like, oh, it can take care of, take control of my computer and do something that I taught it that I normally do, and now it can do it, right? But just today, there was a cool announcement I saw by Jack Dorsey highlighting a project called Goose, which is an open source version of Operator. So like that's going to wave through the whole ecosystem. Yeah. And like, oh, I'm going to have a personal agent. They're going to do all these things for me. Yeah. Chatbots are cool, but this is what I really want.
Really cool. Yeah.
Right. Because now I can double the amount of things I can get done in a day, or triple it, or quadruple it. Right.
Well, this is a conversation I have with a lot of people. So my hot take with all of this is you're going to stare at your screen less
Yeah.
You're not going to be like, people think, oh, we're going to be in this dystopian future where everything's going to be a screen. And look, there's probably going to be some of that. And like, we start talking about things like AR and VR. And yes, those things are going to continue to be developed. But if you want to do all the same stuff you're doing now and more, but not have to stare at your screen and have more human interaction because your agent's taking care of it for you.
Yep.
And what happens when, I'm trying to schedule another interview with you, David, and our agents are going back and forth, making sure they can line up the days and times. And then next thing you know, you just get a ping like, hey, we're both on. Okay, sounds good.
Well, and a lot of those software tools already exist. Like Calendly is the thing.
Sure.
I still have to go through, click, check. Yeah, if an agent understood my preferences, they could just do that for me. And so you can think of a lot of this agentic layer as a wrapper to existing software applications and smart contracts. Like it's not that the use will radically change, it's that I won't have to do it manually anymore, which I'm very much looking forward to.
Well, it'll also learn preferences that you don't even know you have.
Right.
It might say, hey, David always says yes to 2 p.m. calls, but he never says yes to 9 a.m. calls or whatever it is. And it'll just know that. You won't even have to know that, well,
and that's the beautiful thing here is I want it to be an extension of me, right? I want it to reflect my priorities, my preferences, my tasks, but also like my values, the things I care about. Like I'm going to prioritize my family.
Right.
Like, and if it understands that, like, it's not going to shove in a meeting at 6 p.m. during dinner. Right.
Yeah.
Like, unless it's like an emergency or something, but that's what I'm looking forward to. And so we've been talking about these as personal smart agents. And I'm writing an article right now where I'm coining the term super agents, because I think there's a missing descriptor for the agent that represents you that is interacting with other agents.
So almost like a super ego. Is that where that comes from?
More inspired by like Web3.
Okay.
If you've heard of like the super chain, right? In the context of like optimism.
Yep.
It represents like, okay, the thing that coordinates all the other things, right? The thing that is the superset. And so it also is catchy, I think, to have a super agent. And then it's like, okay, if you want to be superhuman, you have to have a super agent, right? And so I think there's sort of a lot of mimetic value there, but it's a missing part of our dictionary, because a smart agent, when I wrote that paper in 23, it was a good descriptor of like, okay, an agent that can use smart contracts, but it wasn't sort of necessarily connoted to be related to you as like your personal agent. Like, how do I describe a personal agent? And people have been throwing around terms like coordinator, delegator, assistant, and they don't feel like they really kind of capture it.
Right.
Because people are still imagining like this Siri-like assistant. And I don't think of it that way. I think of it as an extension of my mind, something that will have access to 10 times as much.
Yeah, I remember one of the first conversations you and I had, I was talking about my personal agent referencing like hundreds of models, and you were like, no. Millions of models. You're thinking way too small. I was like, okay, wow. Also, really quick, I think I mentioned this I definitely did mention it last episode, but also David coined brainpower, which is where the name of the show came from, the quantifiable measure for how strong is an agent effectively. And you had just made reference to, again, the smart agent paper that you wrote. I just want to clarify for everybody, David had coined smart agent prior to Morpheus being published. Like, those are two separate things that we're talking about. It almost sounded like you were referencing the Morpheus white paper, and I just wanted to be super clear that those are two separate events.
Yeah, you can look it up, but it's still up on GitHub. I think it was like May of 23, something like that. I was writing about this idea of smart agents, and I started pulling in all these other people that were exploring the intersection of crypto and AI. And that's probably, why people in that community got a copy of the Morpheus paper, is it was extending that same concept of smart agents into a network context, because I'd been writing about it in a local context. Like, hey, you're gonna have a local wallet and you're gonna have, a local agent, and it's all gonna be open source. And the sort of like I said earlier, the breakthrough was, okay, that's true for the hobbyist and power user, but most people are going to want to use this in a network context. And it was really convincing. It was like, yep, I buy that. And it aligns with sort of everything I've seen in crypto.
Yeah. Also, we haven't really touched on this, but with the intersection of just AI and crypto in general, I know historically I was predominantly in the crypto side of things more than the AI side of things until a couple of years ago. And my understanding is that the AI community was not the biggest fan of crypto just in general. But what's so interesting about this is, and another realization I had is, crypto is native money for AIs. Like, they don't know fiat dollars. Fiat dollars mean nothing to something that only lives out here. Like it means nothing to them. But crypto is something that it's the way that we, like, some people come to us and say, well, Bitcoin's not real because it's not tangible. I can't hold it in my hand. Well, guess what? An AI agent can't hold any fiat currency in its hand.
Right.
So it's all, it's like the only thing that is tangible to them is code. So the native money to them is crypto. So it only makes sense that the two are inextricably, wow, I can't say that word. They're tied together, guys. They're tied together. They can't go away.
Yep.
Yeah,
100%. And I think Eric summed it up really well, which he said something to the tune of digital intelligence is going to use digital money.
Yeah.
Right. And they're both native to the internet, and you're not going to get a bank account for your AI, right? It's not going to pass KYC or AML.
Regulatory.
You give it control of your account, but that's not necessarily a good idea, right? The idea of a Web3 wallet is a much better sort of basis and foundation to build a smart agent or a super agent from, because you hold the private key, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately,
when you can extract it as many times as you want, right?
Yeah.
Like, I could say, okay, I only wanted to access this silo of my total assets, and you don't need a bank's permission to say, hey, I'm going to extract my wallet a little bit further and a little bit further.
Yeah. Well, and to give a shout out to the group that's been doing great work on there, it's Coinbase. It's Lincoln is one of the developers at Coinbase. They've created an agent kit, and that's a lot of what it does. It's like, okay, I only want to give my AI access to $100 and for 1 week to pay this app, right? You can sort of give those fine grain permissions to an agent without giving it the private key. And they use a technology called multi-party compute in order to do that. And they've really sort of done a great job of pushing forward the boundaries of the connection between wallets and AI. So, big credit to Coinbase. I'm going to pop up to the agent hackathon that Coinbase is doing this weekend. And I'm really looking forward to that, because there's been a lot of intersection between the Morpheus community. They've highlighted some of the things that we've built with the Coinbase agent kit that are now weaved into, if you've seen the latest version of Morpheus agents or More Agents 2.2. And so, it's really cool to see all those pieces coming together.
Absolutely. And just for everyone, so everyone knows as well, David's been quite the world traveler, spreading the word. You've been everywhere, which is awesome, and will continue to do so. I know Morpheus will definitely have a presence at all the big upcoming conferences, DAI Day event in Denver coming up. I think, David, is there anything else that you want to touch on while we're here? I think the only other thing is hitting on the roadmap for 2025. One thing that I think is really impressive about Morpheus is at the beginning of 2024, the community published a roadmap and checked every single box in 2024. Well, technically it rolled into January 25, but we'll give, it's crypto. We're give it a little bit of leeway. You want to make sure you get it right. But by January 25, every box that had been laid out in 24 had been checked. And now there are kind of 3 additional stages for 2025. Can we just cover those really quick?
Sure. And so the ones already done, right? You had Genesis is when the white paper came out. Frontier is when the fair launch started in February of 24. Then you had, the Homestead era. Okay, Compute's going live. And we've just moved into the Metropolis phase, right? Where all the builder awards and the projects can launch on top of Morpheus, right? And so that establishes, like you're saying, the rewards for capital, coders, compute, and builders, right? And so all of those emissions are now sort of off and running, incentivizing people to build on Morpheus. And that's something really important to understand. It's like a fair launch that never ends. Like, you didn't miss out. Like, the fair launch, the first 90 days, the bootstrapping before the tokens were emitted, like, that hasn't stopped. You can still stake ETH today, and I think you can earn it at like $8 or $10 per more if you're locking up your rewards for a significant amount of time. And I think the average now is like 3 years of staking.
It's something
for coders, and like almost 3 years for people providing capital. It's like 2 years and 10 months, and the other one is like 3 years and 9 months. But like, people are really diamond handing their ownership of more. So like, that hasn't stopped. Like that competition is still super intense. There's 39,000 staked ETH, like, which is like, $100 million plus, all competing to earn more, right? I mean, you look at the chart, the code contributions just keep pouring in. They're all competing to earn more. Now compute, now builders, right? So I think that's really powerful because so many tokenomic models are like this flash in the pan. Like, hey, this is the hot thing and we're going to put out a bunch of tokens. And 6 months later, like it ran up and it ran all the way down, right? Because there wasn't sort of a long-term view to aligning people towards building on the protocol, right? And that's, I think, so critical. So if you're familiar with the tokenomics of Morpheus, it's 16 years for the initial supply to get created. But then during that period, there's a burn and a lock mechanism. And that creates the block reward for the next 16 years. And it actually goes out for like 256 years. It actually goes longer than that, but like that's how far they showed on the white paper chart, right? And it's like, wow, okay, this is a Bitcoin level, like long-term project. And I was looking at the charts, and Morpheus starts small, right? It has zero value, right? Because there was no pre-sale, there was no pre-mine. People were earning them for $1, and then $2, and then $5. And then by the end of the bootstrapping period, it was like average was like 10, right? And now it trades at $24, $25 a token. So, if you look at the market cap, the effect was like, it started around like 20 million. And a month later it was 40 million. And then it was 60 million. Now it's like $80 million market cap. That's because the emissions are coming out. People are competing to earn them, right? And say, oh, well, that's just the market cap. Tell me about token price. I was like, no, you don't understand. That's all value being added to the network.
To the protocol, yeah.
And the emissions decline every day. You don't have to wait 4 years for halving. Like it's like 2.3 or something like that, more per day. There's a decay rate literally every day.
It was also prior to the main utility of the token even being operational, which is the other thing. I think people just don't realize it, because I've seen people make comments like, oh, well, we're highlighting the dilution of the token. And it's like, okay, that is only true for this short window of time that has already passed. It's over. And now the entire thing is turned on. It's like you had a machine with, you had a car with 3 of the 4 wheels running. And well, at first it was 1 wheel, then 2, right? And now it can drive and go, basically. And so like that's all of that was despite the fact that the full utility was not functional yet. And now it is.
Well, and that's always been my view of tokenomics in general, right? I don't watch the Bitcoin price. Right. I watch how many wallets are using Bitcoin and how much value are they putting over the rails. Like last year it was $20 trillion or something of value across the Bitcoin network. And the questions become really simple. Will more people be using this in the future to send digital money? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Then like the price will figure itself out because I know the scarcity is there. Ethereum's the same thing, right? I don't watch the price. It's like, how many smart contracts are out there? How many users are out there? How much value is crossing the rails? Oh, $30 trillion last year?
It's more than before. And the issuance is going down. And at certain points it's deflationary. Yep. Sounds good.
Yeah.
And by the way, the fiat money printer never shuts off. That's one of my favorites too. I'll tell people, how much money did they print last year? I don't know. Yeah, me neither. Yeah. But I know that they printed it.
Yes, exactly. So now we finally get to Morpheus and you have the same scarcity. 42 million tokens will ever exist. We're in this period where everybody's competing to earn them. And that's how you build broad, deep, strong network effects, right? Is they're not built over a week or 30 days. They're built over years of filtering for people that actually build and actually provide compute and actually provide capital. Like those are the people you want, right? Yeah. Proof of work, that network effect gets stronger and stronger over time. And that's what we've seen with Bitcoin. Even when like particular things like Mt. Gox failed, people still wanted the project to succeed and they built the next exchange and the next exchange, right? It inspired, Brian Armstrong had already been building Coinbase, right? Yes. And they took up that market share, right? and Binance lost, and Binance took off, and they picked up some of that market share, right? But the ecosystem itself is much healthier. Like Gox used to be 80% of all trading in Bitcoin, and now it's very dispersed by like country and region, all these things. So that's the anti-fragile nature of these systems, is because they're built of these networks of humans who all have a reason to want to see it succeed and are willing to step up and put in the work. So, but yeah, it's so cool to see that being validated.
Yeah, I want to linger on that last point just 1 second, because I also heard Luke Stokes, shout out to Luke, by the way, say something similar at a keynote that he gave. It was at the We Are Gonna Make It conference very recently. He was talking about hiring. If you could have all the money in the world, if you're trying to hire the best people to build something collectively, it's not really for sale. Like, you need to find the thing where it's going to attract the people who they will get rewarded for their contribution, but they're among other people doing the same thing. And that's what really drives the incentive over a long period of time, as opposed to just like, here's a lump sum of cash, try to build this thing, and hopefully it works out. And it was kind of similar to what you're saying. It attracts that anti-fragile kind of environment, and then ultimately an anti-fragile network, which is
like Eric Voorhees is not for hire. Like he builds whatever he wants, right? He's an entrepreneur. He's already been successful, but he cares about freedom tech. Like everything he says and has done the last 15 years, you can see the passion he has for it. And so by unleashing a permissionless system, he was free to build Venice. Like, you didn't have to ask anybody for permission. He just did it. Right. And then he came back and added value to the Morpheus community with this airdrop, with having a subnet. Like, he's made huge contributions in some of the papers related to how the compute router works. Like, that's invaluable. Like, you can't get that in a closed 4-wall company where we raised a bunch of money and we're going to hire the best people. Let me break it to you. The best people are not available.
They're not for sale.
They're not for sale. Right. And so you've got to instead align by ethics and philosophy and goals and outcomes they want to see for themselves. Next up is Serenity, which is spreading across the different chains. Like, so we already see codes coming together for Solana. People are talking about putting it onto other rails, extending it to other types of yield. Like, all that's really exciting, right? Because again, Morpheus is chain agnostic, right? It should be for everybody. So that's Serenity. And then there's a new phase that has been named, which is Zion, right? So, and Zion is like what we're talking about with the personal agent, is a focus on, okay, what are the tools people need to have that personal agent acting on their behalf, and for it to do it in a way where I don't constantly have to tell it what I want, but it's learned from my preferences and it's actively taking initiative to do things for me, whether that's earning me money or writing me articles or, communicating. And I can't emphasize how important that's going to be literally this year. You're not going to be able to keep up with this giant flood of agents. Like, you're not even going to understand what's going on or what's true and what's false.
We're talking in 2025.
This year, right? And so that I think is really key. And I would love to see that, there's no magic dates in Morpheus, because it's whatever time it takes the open source contributors to build something. That's sort of why you describe these eras or phases, right? As like, okay, this is what we're shooting for.
Yeah, this is kind of the focus of the time period. It's like, the ages. I think that's a good way to put it.
But I think a year is a good way to kind of describe a time for a theme or an era. So to see that delivered in time for like lots of people to use it, I think it's going to really, really powerful, because the alternative is they're going to be using some corporate AI. Right. And I'd really, really love to own my data and my intelligence and my money and have it serving me and being beneficial, not extractive AI. And that's another thing I talk about in this next article is, okay, we passed the danger of state control. Great. Like, the next thing, the final boss is extractive AI, right? How do we give people AI that's just not a redux of Web 2 where a couple of companies take all of our data, make all the money, and pat us on the head and say, hey, here's a little free software, but like, actually we're the problem.
The information too. I mean, censorship is one of those things that's not a big deal until it is. And then when it is, it's everything, and so that's, and I tell people a lot too. I know a lot of people working on this, we don't want a lawless world of anarchy. We just want rules that make sense. And I don't want to be treated as a criminal just because I want to have access to privacy, or just because I want to be able to own my own data. Like, it's about what you do with those things that matters at the end of the day. And it's no different than, a million other topics that become super political and we don't have to get into, but that's the idea, right? And like, it's so important when you don't have it anymore. And let's just not even get there.
Yep. 100%.
David, do you have anything else you want to like sign off with before I hit the pause?
Keep being awesome. Keep building. This is definitely worth the battle and the fight. And there's going to be obstacles. And, as a community, we can overcome them. Right. And so I would say also, this is just the beginning. Like Venice doing their launch, like there are so many similar projects building cool stuff that are building on Morpheus. And so like, this is literally just the beginning. Right. So if you're like, oh, shucks, I missed out on Venice, like this is still day one. Like that's like saying you missed out on Bitcoin back when it was $10.
Yeah.
Like, and found out it only about when it was 100 or only when it was 1,000. Like it's still really, really early. And so lean in, get involved, participate in the community, earn some more, stake some capital, do whatever you can, but get involved. Like this is really one of those projects I feel that's so important.
Awesome. Totally agreed. Thanks, David. I appreciate it.